Cody in the butterscotch jacket. Yeah, that was there yesterday.
Asatoma Sat Gamaya, Tamosama Jyotir Gamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Dalla falsità conducimi nella verità, dall'oscurità conducimi nella luce, dalla morte conducimi nell'immortalità. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. From the false, lead me to the truth. From darkness, lead me into light. From death, lead me to immortality. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
the Bhaktivedanta Institute and the Second International Congress of Life and its Origin, we would like to welcome you all to this prestigious and historical venue, the Protonoteca Hall, in this beautiful and historical city of Rome, Italy. We are extremely fortunate to have gathered here today for this monumentous event nearly 40 dignitaries, scientists, and distinguished guests from around the world. We would now like to invite the Honorable Gianni Borgna, Cultural Assessor of Rome, to come and light the lamp.
I'll open today short prayer. Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namo Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Avasisate Om Santi 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 Hari Om. Respected spiritual leaders, honorable dignitaries, distinguished delegates, speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the Bhaktivedanta Institute's 3-day International Congress on Life and its Origin, Exploration from Science and Religious Spiritual Traditions here in Rome, the very meaningful and historic city. Rome is a very historic city, and it has played a major role in the Western world for well over 2,000 years. Rome is important because the Vatican City is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic world, and the Pope resides here. The Honorable Mayor of Rome, Mr. Walter Beltroni, has kindly arranged for this hall to be used for this Congress without any charge. This shows the living interest that Rome has in both fields of science and spirituality. We are extremely grateful to him for his kind support and for giving us this facility. On behalf of the organizing committee, I'd like to express our sincere thanks to the Honorable President of the Italian Republic, His Excellency Carlo Giulio Ciampi, for his conveying to us his personal best wishes for the success of this Congress, and also for sending his best well-wishing words. We also acknowledge the kind patronage of the Municipality of Rome, of the President of the Regional Council of Lazio, and of the Aldermanship to the Cultural Politics of the Municipality of Rome. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and UNESCO have also sent us messages conveying their best wishes for the success of this Congress. The organizers are all grateful to all of them for their kind support. The Bhaktivedanta Institute feels very much encouraged by all these positive signs of support from these leaders. This seems to be an indication, a confirmation that currently there is a paradigm shift in progress in the global mindset. This makes now the perfect time for this type of a Congress to be held. For too long, it seems that science and the religion, or science and the spirituality per se, have been in opposition, like enemies. However, the ultimate goal of both is the search for the truth for the welfare of humanity. Therefore, they should join hands for the benefit of the world. Recent high-tech terrorism seems to have shocked the entire world by the gross misuse of science and the religion combined. Would have ever thought of using a high-tech passenger jet liner full of civilians as a guided missile? People all over the world today live in fear and anxiety from terrorism. A major cause for many avoidable activities could be due to a lack of the deeper knowledge and understanding of life. Most of us will agree that knowledge of life is the most important. Many of us dream for a better world with lasting peace and happiness, and many congresses have been held in an attempt to understand life. However, most scientific congresses that have touched upon life in its origin have strictly focused on the material aspect only. However, every serious scientist and a thoughtful scholar will agree with the fact that the scientific discussion based primarily on atoms and molecules in regard to life's origin is extremely limited. The Hungarian Nobel laureate and the biochemist Jerzy remarked, quote, "In my search for the secret of life, I ended up with atoms and electrons, which have no life at all. Somewhere along the line, life has run out through my fingers." Unquote. There is enough evidence that life as such is not made up of only molecules, but there are deeper aspects which we can describe in general as being spiritual aspects of life. Everyone will agree that life as we know it is made up of, number one, the physical body, and number two, the mind, and number three, the conscious entity which animates the first two and experiences the world around him through this mind and the five senses of the body. This conscious being or self is characterized by having undeniable spiritual qualities and properties such as free will, experience of pleasure and pain, joy and suffering, possesses consciousness or the ability to experience knowledge and to respond to it, and the various emotional and aesthetic feelings. All these properties are really an integral part of life, but they are beyond the scope of materialistic science of mere atoms and molecules. A special feature of this Congress is that we will see science and spirituality going hand in hand in the search for the understanding of life and its different aspects, including its origin from both the rigorous scientific and the spiritual domains of reality. As we move on in the 21st century, the time has definitely come to re-examine more thoroughly about the science of life, its purpose, and its origin. In this regard, the ancient religious and spiritual scriptures of the world have contributed this point that everything in this material world, including life, is a product of divine creation. In other words, God is the source of everything, aham sarvasya prabhava, as it says in the Bhagavad Gita. This Congress is primarily aimed at introducing a serious discussion about the role of God in the scientific research of life, its nature and its origin. Many scholars today express that we need a new science or new paradigm to understand the deeper meaning of reality. In this connection, I would like to suggest that spirituality will be a major partner of this new science or of this new paradigm. This new science should be a holistic approach in the search of life. It should be objective and balanced. A one-sided approach will not be able to answer many questions in this vital field of knowledge. Both science and spirituality must be complementary to one another. Many prominent thinkers in science, as well as the religious leaders from around the world, have gathered here for a very productive discussion in regard to life's origin. This Congress is probably the first or one of the first ever as humble attempt to begin a new chapter in the history of the evolution of modern science. It seems that of late, the intelligentsia of the world have become more willing to openly discuss spirituality. This is greatly a welcome development. Back when I was doing my PhD in the United States, in the early 70s, generally most scientists would mock at and dismiss any religious idea as it was considered somewhat unfashionable for a scientist to entertain such thoughts. It seems that science has reached too many dead ends in the search for life's origin, and now they are ready to consider that there may be another nature operating behind the scenes, behind the backdrop of what we can see. The deliberations of the distinguished scholars over the next 3 days will be extremely useful in this millennium for the search of the ultimate knowledge of life. Now, I'd like to show the overhead very briefly. The overview. The overview of the Congress, very briefly, I just like outline. In conjunction with this Congress, we actually had a program yesterday at the prestigious Pontifical Angelicum University's Gian Paolo II Auditorium. The theme of the program was the meaning and the purpose of life, spiritual and scientific perspectives. Those of you who were present yesterday would have enjoyed the lively session there. Now, over the next 3 days of this Congress, we'll hear our learned speakers in 11 academic sessions. Each session has been given a theme which relates to different aspects of life and its origin. I would like to briefly introduce some of these concepts that we have been thinking about so that that will give you at least some idea what we have in our mind. So in the inaugural session, we are very fortunate to distinguished speakers, keynote speakers, Professor B.V. Raman, very well-known quantum physicist. He worked under the famous de Broglie in physics, and will speak primarily focusing on the scientific aspects of life, as well as touching some aspects of spirituality. And we also have the next speaker, Professor Royce Crolius. Is well known for his theological aspects, understanding of world religions. He will speak from the world religious viewpoint. In session 2, we have the title session is called Spiritual Perspectives on Life and its Origin. Now, in this session, I can say that in the last few centuries, a paradigm shift has taken place in the global worldview, especially regarding the nature of life and its origin. It has drastically changed from a spiritually based one to a completely materially based one, primarily because of the influence of science and technology in our urbanized lives. However, this change of mindset has produced a tremendous impact on the values and the sense of human responsibility in conduct. Every thinking person feels a great need to bring back the proper understanding of life, which is a balance between spirituality and material science. There is therefore a great need of exploring the spiritual dimensions of life urgently. In session 3, we'll discuss about the cosmology and cosmogony of life, these contemporary issues. Here, we'll discuss the human mind is extremely inquisitive. All traditions since the beginning of civilization agree that inquiry about the philosophy, meaning, purpose, and origin of life constitute the most important part of knowledge, or the foundation upon which all other knowledge stands. Our distinguished speakers in this third session will explore the current scientific and the spiritual concepts of the universe, including life and its origin. In session 4, we have, the title is called Paradigms versus Values of Life. So just a short word from Kuhn. Kuhn described that a paradigm as a collection of beliefs shared by scientists. These beliefs include a set of assumptions, agreements, models, mathematics, terminologies, and theories about how problems are to be defined, understood, and resolved. When Einstein said, "We cannot solve today problems with the same thinking that gave us those problems." So various cultural and spiritual traditions and worldviews have different paradigms with their corresponding values and meanings. The speakers in this fourth session will enlighten us on those different traditions from which we distill the essence of these values for us to consider and evaluate and utilize. In the fifth session, the session is titled "The Science of God." So we can ask, does God exist? Obviously, this is a billion-dollar question. Since the dawn of civilization, the concept of the personality of God, Godhead, has played a very significant role in shaping our worldviews on the meaning and the purpose of life. However, ever since modern scientific culture began dominating the world stage over the past 400 years, it has tremendously decreased the paradigm of a God-centered civilization. As a consequence of this, in this present age of science and technology, we see in the world there are many unwanted symptoms in the behavior which bring negative influences that affect everyone's life. We have to recognize that scientific knowledge is extremely limited, so we would not discard religious wisdom. So we should not discard religious wisdom and spiritual technology because they are even more important in shaping the character, conduct of a man than the purely materialistic aspects of education. We eagerly expect that the speakers in this session to enlighten us about areas where human knowledge will be able to appreciate and approach transcendental knowledge of energies that operate beyond the jurisdiction of the observable laws of nature. In session 6, we'll discuss about a theistic interpretation of empirical observations on life in its origin. In science, that empirical observations constitute the very foundation of modern science. The scientific process entails hypothesis, experimentation, observation, collecting data, and obtaining the result. This result then has to be interpreted to derive utility from it. Modern science has fallen into the trap of selectively accepting only those findings which fit into their preconceived material paradigms or material hypotheses. When these results are to be interpreted, they try to manipulate them to fit the results into these paradigms. Evidence that doesn't fit or contradicts is blindly rejected. Countless examples of this have been exposed in the highly thought-provoking book. This is a forbidden archaeology by one of the well-known authors, who is also here, will be one of the speakers. So this book has opened many of these ideas in this area. So in other words, the modern science tries to be almost exclusively mechanistic. However, these mechanistic models are thus entirely dependent on our limited powers of sense perceptions. However, every honest and thoughtful person will agree that the electron, just like God, has never been seen. However, although the electron cannot be seen, its nature and existence can be understood by its symptoms. The symptoms can be inferred from the electron's influence and interactions with observable energies. In the same way, the spiritual soul, or the spiriton, we can say, cannot be seen, but its symptom consciousness can be perceived. Similarly, God can also can be experienced if we look for the symptoms of His existence. For example, beauty, truthfulness, intricate and mathematically perfect laws of nature, mysteries and mysticism, etc. Some of these are quantifiable, such as the mathematical laws, while others, like beauty, cannot be quantified or explained by rigorous scientific process. But we all know that both of these groups do exist as a part of reality. Therefore, the conclusion is that reality exists beyond the boundaries of empirical observation. In session 7, we have a session that's called God and the New Biology. I use the term this new biology in the sense that something which is not very strongly practiced. So when you bring this spiritual conception about life, so in the modern science, so that will be what I call, it is not exactly new, but at least our paradigm shift will take place, so therefore it's called new biology. Here we find a prominent example how a faulty and grossly inadequate hypothesis by researchers in general has become blindly or unquestioningly accepted almost as an axiomatic truth. Research is done only in a direction that may fulfill the pre-existing paradigm, as I've already mentioned earlier. So this will be discussed very extensively in this session. In session number 8, that is called Scientific Exploration for the Existence of God. This is on Saturday night. These programs are held in a place called Restore Theater, which is about 6-7 minutes walk from here. And so in this session, we'll explore about the different aspects of the scientific conceptions about the existence of God. So in this way, these sessions are in such a way that everyone can can participate in such a way that they can contribute their thoughts and ideas, so that from there we can generate some possibilities in the future for some research work. So in this way, we have in the last session, we have further research in the future in this area. When we all understand life, then a lasting, let's say, desire or lasting achievement of world peace, a lasting world peace, that such things will be possible. But otherwise, we have so many summits, like international peace summits, that the religious or the political or these things are, although we like to have world peace, but at the same time, unless we know the foundation about what is the meaning of life and how life exists. So these are very, if we are not convinced about the existence of life, that it would not be so easy to bring having a world peace. So we hope that this study of life from both scientific and religious perspectives, I think, can be applied in all aspects of our existence, in political circles, in social circles, and in all our human activities. So when we come to that platform, then there is a possibility that there will be lasting world peace, and then we can all live happily and in friendship with the universal brotherhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. T.D. Singh. Just briefly, we have a message from the Honorable Daniela Monteforte, the assessor of the province of Rome. She would like to send her warm welcome to all the participants of the Congress. She hopes that peace and human rights will develop all over the world. We would now like to invite our keynote speaker, Vivi Roman.
Considero un onore essere in questa conferenza, in questa prestigiosa università, in questa antica e bellissima città. Mi sarebbe piaciuto presentare il mio discorso in italiano, ma non ne in grado. Almeno devo salutarvi in italiano. Buongiorno, mille grazie. questions related to the origins are among the most intriguing ones that tease and taunt the human mind. How did the universe come to be? How did we humans come to be? How did our languages emerge? These are not only interesting questions in themselves, but are fundamental and inescapable when one reflects on the nature of things and of existence. If we close our eyes for a moment and reflect how all this world that we experience became so real for our conscious self and remains so only for a brief span of time, which is a mere wink in the eternity that lies before and behind this passing moment, we begin to realize that there is something unimaginably mysterious about it all. No wonder the human mind has been grappling with these since the most ancient times. One might say, as the poet Wordsworth did, here we are in a bright and breathing world, our origin, what matters it? But it is equally true, as Ernest Renan wrote, that on garde toujours la marque de ses origines. We always have traces of our origins. Traditional creation stories may be considered from different perspectives. They may be regarded as profound revelations of how it all came to be, revelations to the prophets and sage poets of different religions. Or again, they may be taken as symbolic of more profound truths presented in ways that are easily understood. Or they could be taken as ancient attempts by the human mind to account for the puzzling and fascinating questions confronting us. Different people have approached the matter differently. My task today is to reflect a little on what science has been saying on the question of origins and how we may relate it to religious perspectives. First, we should note that there is no unanimity on the question of origins even in the world of science. There are certainly overlaps here and there is consensus on matters of methodology, but as to the details of the explanations, there are a few competing theories. As far as we know, the kind of life we are familiar with exists only on our planet. As far as scientific extrapolations go, we can speak of life of any form only in our physical universe. Science tells us nothing about extra cosmic space and time. Indeed, the phrase is oxymoronic. What this means is related to the questions of biogenesis is that of cosmogenesis. One cannot theorize or speculate on the origin of life without a framework for the origin of the physical universe. In this context, there are some fundamental differences between the scientific and the religious perspectives. As to scientific theories of cosmogenesis, an interesting fact is that whereas religious answers to fundamental questions vary from place to place, scientific answers tend to vary from time to time. Few scientific cosmogenetic theories, answers, have enjoyed acceptance in the scientific world for more than a century. New theories on cosmogenesis come and go on the basis of newly acquired data and new insights of investigators. Most of the founders of modern science were deeply religious men who believed in a divine being. Thus arose a new vision of God as an omnipotent creator of the universe and its laws, who left its vast machine ticking away like a well-constructed clock, smoothly, precisely, and interminably. Thus Robert Boyle wrote, "The excellent contrivance of the great system of the world, and especially the curious fabric of the bodies of animals, have made the great motives that in all ages and nations induced philosophers to acknowledge a deity as the author of these admirable structures." Some were prepared to admit that once in a while, if and when the mechanism needed fixing, the creator of the cosmic clock would intervene to set it right again. This, in essence, was the so-called deist view. Its advantages were that it prevented science from sliding into materialism, and it made God more rational than whimsical, respectful of rules rather than given to arbitrary behavior. But its serious disadvantage was that it made God no more than an Aristotelian first cause who, after the first and only act of creation, receded into eternal inaction, becoming what the French called le Dieu fainéant, the do-nothing God. More seriously, it was only a first step to dispense with even this God in matters of everyday concern. In the current scientific framework, the universe tumbled into existence because of some mishap in a latent symmetry, intelligible only to those who know group theory and high-energy physics. The root cause of it all is known in the mathematical poetry of modern physics as Higgs boson, but which, because of the central role it is believed to have played in cosmic emergence, was dubbed the God particle by Leon Lederman. The Big Bang model arose from the interpretation by Abbé Lemaitre of receding galaxies as due to an expanding universe. This led to the idea that if we trace time backwards, there must have been a moment when the entire universe was concentrated at a point whence it must have exploded. Thus, the universe was born with a bang that was truly big, spewing out matter and radiation every which way, creating space and time in the process. Theory suggests that the gestation period of the universe was the fantastically infinitesimal interval between 10 to the minus 43 and 10 to the minus 35 seconds, known as a Planck time. After the Planck time, the universe grew to the size of a mini marble during a millisecond, and then the whole thing expanded to about 10 to the 30 times its size. There were further separation of force fields, and so on and on, the theory goes. Now, the Big Bang explanation of cosmogenesis is fairly well established, although there are other theories now in the making with appropriate modification. Stephen Hawking said famously, "The odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous." I think that there are clearly religious implications here. As to science's view of the origin of life, according to one view, it was only billions of years after cosmogenesis that biogenesis occurred. In the remote past, more than 3 billion years ago, and barely a billion years after the formation of our planet, there were lands barren and waste, volcanoes steaming and puffing sulfurous fumes, and oceans of salt-free waters. The Earth's atmosphere consisted then largely of hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and a few other gases. Gigantic clouds and torrential rains rose and fell, seeping salts from land into pristine sea. In the mammoth laboratories of the Earth's oceans and airs, kindled by heat and lightning, by radiations from the sun and other excitants, the turbulent chemistry of the early molecules churned out the first organic structures. Carbohydrates and amino acids were thus concocted. These increased in complexity and further reactions took place. The waters of the period constituted what has been described as the primordial soup in which the mutual interactions of the components gave rise to molecules of ever-increasing size and intricacy. Energy-trapping mechanisms came into play. After myriad patterns and permutations, mysterious entities with the property of self-replication emerged. These again grew in numbers and variety until at last nucleic acids and proteins were formed. The wonder of life had begun. Now there is evidence that life arose under harsh volcanic conditions. So it has been said that the cradle of life could have been a sulfurous swirl of superheated water and oozing lava. This prompted Günther Wechterhäuser to give a simple recipe for life. Boil water, stir in the minerals like iron sulfide and nickel sulfide, bubble in carbon monoxide and the odor of rotten eggs, wait for proteins to form. Once a spark of life was lit, the self-replicating systems began to multiply in number and variety, the nucleic acids embodying the subtle coding and that preserves life patterns slipped now and then. These changes in structures were the mutations which may be looked upon either as responses to the unceasing turmoil in the Earth's environmental features or as alterations resulting from changing conditions. The first palpitations of life began to evolve along countless directions. As ages rolled by, the grand upheaval shook the planet's crust. Ever newer kinds of plants and creatures shaped themselves. Both land and sea became homes for innumerable life forms. Amphibians, insects, reptiles, mammals, all evolved along the picturesque plethora of plants and trees. After well over 1 billion years of such experimentation, the evolving principles brought forth the product we call the human race. Homo sapiens began roaming the wilds of Africa. Then there was thought and language and agriculture and culture and thinkers arguing about how it all began. We are all familiar with the mind-boggling time scales involved in all of this. Changing scales and assuming that the Earth was formed 100 years ago, which we take to represent 4.5 billion years, humanoids began to emerge barely 3 weeks ago, and the Christian era is only some 20 minutes old. Astrophysicists assure us that on this time scale, in another 100 years or so, the sun would extinguish himself. Nature has taunted us by making life too short to be taken seriously and too long for life not to be taken seriously. Some find this account to be quite interesting and also persuasive because it is fortified by charts and data and mathematical theories. It is a conjectural conclusion rather than a solemn proclamation of intelligent speculation. Those who adopt scientific cosmology grant that there is, as there always will be, something tentative in any scientific vision of cosmogenesis. During the past several decades, experimentalists have been trying to replicate the process of simulating the primordial soup subjected to early atmospheric conditions. But we are far from synthesizing anything like the DNA. It is far too complex. The blue-green algae, which is some 3.5 billion years old, has some 3.6 million base pairs. In other words, synthesizing a few organic molecules from appropriate physicochemical conditions and concluding that this is how life began would be like saying that because we find some patterns in the sand patterns in the dunes which resemble alphabets, that is how La Divina Commedia came to be written. It also has been suggested that perhaps there once were much simpler organisms which have now disappeared altogether. The role of RNA. Molecular biologists have explained how some simple proteins may be synthesized from amino acids, and even the extraordinary process of replication of proteins has been uncovered through the recipe of RNA. Then again, the amino acids in organisms are invariably left-handed, and one sees here the need for the ribosomal RNA and the transfer RNA. Various theories have been proposed to explain how this might have happened. Some have even suggested a prebiotic evolutionary process in which a community of informational molecules participated. A generally accepted view has been that genetic mechanism that actively synthesize cell membranes and were responsible for cell division and cell stability were also responsible for self-evolution, cellular evolution. Many scientists argue that the laws of nature favor the genesis of life everywhere in the universe. This reminds us of another theory which was proposed in the first decades of the 20th century. It was discarded and is now gaining ground again. I'm referring to the idea of panspermia suggested by Svante Arrhenius, according to which life did not originate here on Earth, but somewhere in the universe. Perhaps from some frozen spores of organisms clung to splintered rocks from an exploding planet, and then these reached Earth as meteorites. In purely scientific terms, the panspermia theory gives us a grander vision of life in the universe. According to some NASA scientists, DNA was fossilized from fossilized bacterial remains some 200 million years old have been detected in meteorites. The panspermia theory is a non-romantic version of the idea that we are descendants of creatures from another planetary system. It is to some scientists its interest lies in that it gives a jolt to the centrality of the Earth hypothesis. Even if the panspermia theory were true, it does not solve the question of how the first organisms came to be. As science gains more and more understanding of the ultimate constituents of life, that is, its genes, it also tracks down the biological origin of humans. According to one estimate, based on genetic analysis, we are all descendants of a single human being, the Adam of our species, one might say, who lived some 270,000 years ago. This ancient ancestor of ours and the New World monkey, some evolutionary biologists tell us, had a common ancestor who lived 7 million years ago. In the midst of all the data, complex theories, and shifting ideas as to how life began, some have argued that corresponding to the mystery of the Big Bang for the physical universe, there must have been a biological Big Bang whose cause and purpose we may never know. It is important to recognize the points of difference between scientific and the religious quests in this context. And I'll come later to how we can combine them. We may do this without ascribing relative values to them. First, according to traditional worldviews, the Earth was the center of the universe. Today, religions no longer subscribe to this view, but they have a more sophisticated version of it, which is far more meaningful, and that is that the Earth is central to the universe. Science, however, persists in regarding our planet as just another insignificant speck among countless specks, large and minuscule, that constitute the material universe. From the religious perspective, the universe was born from the will of a divine principle. In other words, the universe is the fruit of an act of intentional creation. Science considers the universe to be a mere accident. It could have remained unformed or formed very differently from the scientific point of view. Thirdly, religions declare that there is a definite goal and purpose to the universe, even if we are not able to fathom what this may be. For science, there seems to be only happenings in the universe, be they the decay of elementary particles, the formation of stars and galaxies, or coming together of atoms and molecules. Religions regard humans as important in a silent and senseless universe, whereas in the grand sweep of science, humans are not any more important, relevant, or significant. How shall we reconcile and make the compromise? Some people hold that there can be no compromise between hardcore science and ardent religion. Others believe that this can and must be achieved on fundamental issues. No matter where the truth lies, whether in the religious doctrines or in the scientific theories, it is important to seek some kind of concordance between religions and scientific visions, because science is the purest form, in the purest form, and religion in the noblest expression are among the lofty elements of human societies and civilizations. When a society ignores science, it will linger in darkness, beset with superstitions and mindless beliefs. The exploitation of scientific knowledge ushered in a period of better life and creature comforts and promise of a better world for one and all. However, applications of science and the adoption of a purely scientific materialist worldview have also resulted in an ominous threat to humanity and to the human spirit. When a society derides the religious spirit, it is likely to degenerate into an amoral system where people do their chores, eat and drink and live for the day with no source that can inspire them to hope and fulfillment, to caring and compassion, to joy and meaningful poetry. But then it is also a fact of history, as Lucretius reminded us long ago, that untold atrocities have been perpetuated in the name of science. But even with all this potential for doing harm, both science and religion have enriched humanity in myriad ways, and have given also that it should be practically impossible to eradicate either science or religion from society. It is incumbent upon us not only to cleanse both science and religion of their harmful dimensions, but also seek ways in which we can effect understanding and bridges between the two, so that we can live in peace and harmony in society. That I take to be a purpose of conferences like this. I want to consider what may be called the anthropic insignificance first. From the scientific perspective, though Homo sapiens is one of the latest products of evolution, it is by no means the most important from the survival of life as such. In fact, contrary seem to be the case. As one writer put it, humans may think they are evolution's finest product, but the creepies, crawlies, and squishies rule the world. Remove people from the face of the earth, and the biosphere would perk along just fine. Remove the invertebrates, and the global ecosystem would collapse. Humans and other vertebrates would probably last only a few months, and the planet would again belong mostly to algae and bacteria. The importance of the human species is by no means obvious when viewed in terms of our physical dimensions. No planet, star, or galaxy, if they could judge, would attribute to puny humans greater weight than to icebergs and volcanoes. When it comes to sheer physical power, our bodies are but flimsy structures, susceptible to instant decimation by nature's fury. A lightning bolt can kill anyone in a brief thunderous flash. Hurricanes and earthquakes annihilate thousands without a moment's notice. When we reckon the age of our species in relation to that of the universe and reflect on the ephemeral nature of individual lives, our significance shrinks even further. What are a few million years of human survival compared to the more than 10 billion years during which the universe existed? Homo sapiens is all too frail, a very recent and vulnerable entity in the grand arena of space in the endless stretch of time. To those who are touched by the spiritual dimension of existence and the religious experience of life, scientific cosmology seems to be one drab and dismal story in which human beings are totally unexpected byproducts, accidents, or worse, like inconsequential mushrooms that sprout in the wilderness and perish. All the grandeur of a magnificent universe with splendid stars in the firmament is reduced to tenuous hydrogen gas pervading all over and concentrating here and there, to dying stars with nuclear fire at the core, galaxies running amok every which way like swarms of frightened fowl, sea salts cooking into animalcules. To make matters worse, the scientific picture gives the cold shoulder to God Almighty and leaves no room for reverence or gratitude. At the purely physical level, humans don't have a special place in the universe, it would seem. However, it would be but a partial vision if we fail to recognize that we play an unusual role in the cosmos. All we have to do is to imagine the auditorium of La Scala that is stark empty when a most magnificent opera is being performed. What a wasteful expenditure of energy, of artistry that would be. So it is in the universe without human beings. But for the probing human minds, there would be no formulas for the elliptical orbits, no reckoning of space or time or their intertwining. Again, but that pre-life universe was insipid and inert, with no music or melody, no poetry or philosophy. And so, let me come to the concluding thoughts, since we are running out of time, the last one. We begin to realize that the emergence of awareness was a great event in cosmic history as the first big blast of the material creation. That awareness, the consciousness, injects meaning into a mechanical and mindless world. It is as if by our presence we have lit up the whole universe, which until our emergence had been plunged in a stark stillness devoid of joy or meaning. Religions are on the mark when they attach primary importance to human consciousness in an otherwise colorless, tasteless, odorless, soundless, lightless universe. No matter when, where, or how life arose, it has extraordinary significance in adding dimensions which were not there before human emergence. And so it is in this spirit that we need to recognize that no matter what theories we have about the origins of life, the centrality of human consciousness is of the utmost importance in the emergence of the universe. Thank you.